Imagine 185,000 trained soldiers found dead overnight without a single sign of battle. No arrows fired, no blood spilled, just an entire army silenced beneath the stars. What could have possibly caused such a silent annihilation? The Assyrians were the most feared military force of the ancient world, conquering nations and demolishing cities with brutal efficiency. Yet one night outside Jerusalem's walls, beneath the silent sky, a power unseen reshaped history. Something happened that historians still struggle to explain. An invisible force wiped out an entire army. Was it a plague, a mysterious illness, or something far more powerful? The answer would change everything. What happens when a nation abandons its spiritual foundation? In Jerusalem, under King Ahaz, the once sacred city descended into a darkness so profound it threatened to extinguish the light of faith entirely. The Jerusalem of old, a beacon of divine worship, had become unrecognizable. Streets that once echoed with psalms and prayers now bustled with merchants selling carved figures of foreign deities. Where pilgrims once traveled to worship the god of their ancestors, locals now gathered at pagan altars erected at every corner and crossroad. The great Temple of Solomon stood as a hollow monument to what once was. Its massive doors remained locked, its courtyards empty, its sacred rituals abandoned. The silence of the temple spoke volumes about a kingdom that had lost its way, a city whose light was dimming under the weight of false idols. Jerusalem had fallen dramatically from the glorious days of King David and Solomon, who established it as the spiritual center of a nation devoted to one God. Under Ahaz, the city transformed into a marketplace of competing deities, with the living God relegated to memory. King Ahaz orchestrated this spiritual decay with methodical precision. Official ceremonies now honored gods borrowed from neighboring nations. The acrid smoke of strange incense filled the air where sacred offerings once burned. The king himself led rituals that would have horrified his ancestors, including whispers of the unthinkable, child sacrifice, offering his own flesh and blood to appease the hunger of foreign gods. This spiritual collapse triggered immediate consequences throughout society. Fear gripped the populace, not reverent fear, but primal terror requiring constant appeasement of unpredictable deities. The cacophony of pagan chants drowned out the ancient songs of faith. Community bonds frayed as neighbors grew suspicious of neighbors. The moral compass that had guided generations now spun wildly, leaving people disoriented. As the kingdom turned from its divine protector, powerful enemies began circling. Military threats loomed, political alliances crumbled. The kingdom that had once stood secure under divine protection now scrambled for earthly safeguards that proved increasingly inadequate. Amidst this spiritual wasteland, young Prince Hezekiah watched with growing concern. From palace windows, he witnessed his people, whose ancestors had seen the Red Sea part, bowing before lifeless statues. One morning remained etched in his memory, attending a new altar's dedication, a massive structure built to foreign specifications. As strange chants echoed around him, deep revulsion rose within him. Though outwardly compliant, inwardly he recoiled from everything that violated his sacred heritage. Unlike his peers who dismissed them as outdated tales, Hezekiah treasured accounts of Abraham's faith, Moses' leadership, and David's courage. These stories gave him hope when darkness seemed overwhelming. In quiet solitude, the prince would unroll sacred scrolls, reading by lamplight the promises made to his ancestors. These private acts of devotion became his resistance, silent preparation for a day he prayed would come, when Jerusalem might return to the God who had chosen it. Those sacred scrolls Hezekiah studied in secret would soon become the blueprint for a revolution that would shake Jerusalem to its foundations. When the crown touched his head, the hammers were already being forged that would smash the idols his own father had erected. Decades of spiritual corruption had become comfortable, profitable, and politically expedient. But the young king's first command startled everyone. The massive temple doors, long sealed shut, would be thrown open again. The sound of ancient hinges groaning echoed through Jerusalem as temple doors, untouched for a generation, swung wide. Hezekiah summoned the scattered priests before him and declared with authority beyond his years, "Clean this temple up. Take out everything that shouldn't be here. We're going to worship God the right way again." The priests exchanged uneasy glances, many having adapted to serving both the true God and imported deities. This announcement upended Jerusalem's established order. Merchants selling idols saw their businesses threatened. Priests of foreign practices faced obsolescence. Even ordinary citizens who had embraced undemanding religious customs murmured against these changes. Hezekiah had inherited a throne anchored in compromise that would resist transformation. The temple cleansing proceeded rapidly. Workers removed years of dust, foreign artifacts, and pagan symbols from the sacred space. In forgotten corners, they discovered abandoned worship instruments, teaching scrolls and ceremonial items. Experienced priests began training younger colleagues in proper rituals and songs. The silent sanctuary would soon resound with worship again. Beyond the temple, teams spread throughout Jerusalem and the countryside with one mission: destroy every pagan altar, shrine, and sacred pole. Hammers struck stone throughout the city as statues fell and altars crumbled. Citizens watched, mesmerized by this visible dismantling of their society's spiritual confusion. Hezekiah's most controversial decision targeted Nehushtan, the bronze serpent Moses had crafted centuries earlier. This desert-wandering relic had become venerated, with people burning incense before it. As the ancient artifact was brought forward, the king proclaimed, "No more false gods, no matter how sacred their history." With those words, the bronze serpent shattered like chains breaking, freeing the people from misplaced devotion and demonstrating that even hallowed objects could become spiritual traps. Public response transformed from initial shock to active participation, many discovering their rich heritage for the first time. When Hezekiah reinstated Passover, it became a powerful reconnection symbol. His messengers traveled with an invitation. Remember your special bond with God and the promises made to your families long ago. Resistance persisted from those invested in the old ways. Some worshipped at hidden shrines. Others feigned compliance while privately maintaining former practices. Yet transformation spread visibly. The nation relearned worship. Songs filled restored courtyards. Prayer and sacrifice rhythms became familiar again. Joy returned to Jerusalem as worship of the true God resumed. Beyond external reforms, Hezekiah strengthened his people internally by recounting God's faithfulness throughout their history. This spiritual renewal would prove crucial, as the young king's bold stand had attracted attention from the world's most fearsome power. As Hezekiah restored the rhythms of worship to Jerusalem, an ancient terror was casting its shadow across the land. The Assyrian Empire stretched like a dark colossus from the shores of Egypt to the mountains of Persia, a realm built on conquest and maintained through fear. Unlike the spiritual revolution within Jerusalem's walls, Assyria's power came from innovations that transformed the very nature of warfare. Their soldiers wielded weapons of iron when others still used bronze, giving them a devastating advantage in battle. Every aspect of their military machine had been refined into an art of destruction. The Assyrians had mastered siege warfare, transforming it into a science of certain victory. Their wooden towers bristled with archers who rained death upon defenders. Their battering rams, massive logs with metal heads, struck city walls with relentless rhythm until the strongest fortifications crumbled. Palace reliefs from Nineveh depicted these engines of war, a warning carved in stone of what awaited those who defied the Assyrian king. What truly set Assyria apart was their calculated cruelty. They unmade entire civilizations. Captives were skinned alive. Human skulls were stacked into pyramids as monuments to Assyrian might. Entire populations were uprooted and scattered across the empire, their identities dissolved like salt in water. These were deliberate policies designed to crush the very idea of resistance. The northern kingdom of Israel had already felt this storm of iron and cruelty. The 10 tribes had been swept away, their cities reduced to ash, their people vanished into the vast territories of their conquerors. Now, those same merciless eyes turned toward Jerusalem, the last flickering light in a region that had learned to bow before Assyria. Intelligence reports filtered into Jerusalem with growing frequency, each city's fall, casting longer shadows through streets where songs of worship had only recently returned. "They cannot be stopped," whispered merchants who had witnessed Assyrian sieges. "Their armies cover the hills like locusts. warned travelers from the north. King Sennacherib had particular reason to target Jerusalem. Hezekiah's religious revolution represented more than spiritual reform. It was a direct challenge to Assyrian dominance. When Hezekiah tore down pagan altars, he rejected the very gods Sennacherib claimed empowered his conquests. In the ancient world, religious defiance was political rebellion, and Sennacherib could not allow such defiance to stand. The mismatch was staggering. Jerusalem's defenders, shopkeepers and farmers, standing alongside few professional soldiers, faced the world's first true professional army, men trained from youth for conquest. Perhaps the most terrifying Assyrian weapon was psychological warfare. Before armies arrived, their messengers would describe in excruciating detail the fates of those who had resisted. These psychological warriors painted verbal pictures so horrific that many cities simply opened their gates. They speak to you in your own language, a refugee warned Jerusalem's council. They know your fears before you do. They make surrender seem like mercy. As reports confirmed the Assyrian army's approach, a terrible truth settled over Jerusalem. No fortification had withstood their siege engines. No army had defeated their iron weapons. This unstoppable force now threatened to extinguish the spiritual revival Hezekiah had kindled. Jerusalem's renewed faith would face its ultimate test. Jerusalem's walls stood ready, and water flowed safely beneath the city. Yet what arrived on the horizon would test more than stone defenses. The Assyrian army swept across the valleys surrounding Jerusalem like a storm tide, their encampment stretching across hills that once appeared green and peaceful. From the city walls, defenders watched as thousands of iron spears caught the sunlight, gleaming like stars fallen to earth. Siege towers, taller than the mightiest cedars of Lebanon, were assembled with military precision, while enormous battering rams were positioned, their metal heads shaped like beasts, waiting to devour Jerusalem's fortifications. Among this machinery of war emerged Rabshakeh, Sennacherib's master of psychological destruction. His weapon was neither sword nor bow, but carefully crafted words designed to shatter resolve. The crowd fell silent as he approached with his guards. When he opened his mouth, perfect Hebrew flowed forth instead of Assyrian, a calculated choice ensuring every defender, civilian and child, would understand the terrible ultimatum. A woman clutched her son closer, whispering, "How does he speak our tongue so well?" An elder soldier gripped his spear tighter, recognizing the tactics about to unfold. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you." Rabshakeh's voice boomed across the stunned gathering. "He cannot deliver you from my hand." Each word struck like an arrow, deliberately targeting their trust in Hezekiah and faith in God. A merchant near the wall felt his knees weaken as Rabshakeh methodically dismantled their confidence, questioning how a king who removed so many altars could expect divine protection. Has any god of any nation ever delivered his land from the king of Assyria? He taunted, listing conquered kingdoms whose gods had failed them. Then came his bargain, carefully constructed to plant doubt in every heart. "Make peace with me and come out to me," Rabshakeh offered, his voice softening. "Then each of you will eat fruit from your own vine and fig tree, and drink water from your own cistern, until I come and take you to a land like your own." A young mother considered these words, wondering if surrender might save her children from starvation. Inside Jerusalem, his poisonous words spread through narrow streets. Citizens who days before stood confidently behind their king now questioned whether resistance was futile, whether Hezekiah had doomed them all by refusing Assyrian demands. When Hezekiah heard Rabshakeh's words, he tore his royal garments in anguish. Yet instead of responding directly, he sought wisdom from a higher source. Messengers hurried to find the prophet Isaiah, their sandals slapping against stone in desperate rhythm. Isaiah's response cut through the fear like sunlight through storm clouds. "This is what the Lord says. Do not be afraid of the words with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me." The prophet assured them God himself would defend Jerusalem against the Assyrian threat. As darkness fell, oil lamps flickered in homes where families huddled close. Parents whispered ancient prayers with renewed urgency. Soldiers gripped weapons with sweating palms. and children clutched treasured possessions they feared losing forever. The psychological battle had created wounds no bandage could bind, invisible injuries to hope, and faith that threatened Jerusalem more than any physical weapon. As the first light of dawn painted Jerusalem's eastern sky, an unsettling silence fell upon the city. Citizens who had spent the night in prayer now climbed to the walls, bracing themselves for the terrifying sight of Assyrian warriors preparing their assault. Mothers clutched children close, soldiers gripped weapons with white knuckles, and elders whispered prayers beneath their breath. But instead of war drums and battle cries, they encountered only stillness, a profound, unnatural quiet that stretched across the valley where death had visited in the night. "Something is wrong," murmured a watchman, squinting into the distance. The expected movement of thousands of soldiers rising for battle was absent. No smoke from cooking fires, no shouts of commanders, just eerie stillness that seemed to spread like mist through the Assyrian camp. Several brave defenders, led by a captain of Hezekiah's guard, cautiously ventured beyond the city gates. They moved with weapons drawn, expecting an ambush. What they discovered instead would be whispered about for generations. Row upon row of Assyrian soldiers lay motionless, 185,000 warriors, struck down without a single mark of violence on their bodies. These elite fighters, who had conquered nations, now lay in perfect formation, as if death had found them in their sleep. "They're all dead," the captain reported upon returning, his voice trembling. "Every soldier, every archer, every chariot driver, gone. Their weapons still sheathed, their armor still fastened, as if they simply stopped breathing." The news spread through Jerusalem like wildfire. Those who had expected to die that morning now stood stunned, unable to comprehend their deliverance. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others raced to the walls to witness the impossible sight. Children who had hidden in cellars emerged into sunlight they never expected to see again. At the edges of the camp, panic gripped the survivors, mostly officers who had slept apart from the main army. These men fled in blind terror, abandoning wagons filled with treasures collected from conquered cities. The sight of an entire army eliminated without battle drove them to scatter like leaves in a storm, leaving behind riches they once killed to possess. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. The morning air hung still like echoes of a divine exhale. Jerusalem stood between night and day, between death and deliverance, witnessing what no human hand could accomplish. In Jerusalem, the prophet Isaiah spoke to the gathered people. "The angel of the Lord passed through their camp last night. Not by sword, not by arrow, not by any human hand has Jerusalem been saved. The one who created all life took their breath while you slept." Families who had prepared for their final hours now embraced in tearful celebration. Markets reopened as if awakening from hibernation. The temple filled with worshipers bringing thankful offerings. Songs of praise replaced whispered prayers of desperation. Jerusalem's sudden deliverance became the talk of the ancient world. Messengers raced to distant cities with news that the unstoppable Assyrian force had been stopped by an unseen hand. Nations that had bowed to Assyrian demands now dared to imagine freedom. The empire that had seemed invincible suddenly appeared vulnerable. Throughout human history, moments arise when the impossible becomes reality, when divine power silences the mightiest armies. Like a sudden dawn breaking after endless night, the miraculous intervention outside Jerusalem's walls declared heaven's authority over earth's strongest powers. This divine deliverance teaches us that victory often comes through forces beyond our comprehension. The Assyrian defeat stands as powerful testament that faith overcomes insurmountable odds. When human calculation points to defeat, divine intervention rewrites the outcome. This supernatural pattern echoes across centuries toward that final confrontation. Ancient texts describe what heavenly forces await as the final battle approaches. Join us next time as we unveil the 7 archangels